Mr. Dave, Mr. Ron, are we live? We are live. Awesome. Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. How are you? Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Commander. How's everybody doing? Okay, I'm hoping we're all doing good and looking forward to talking about cannabis. So, I'm Mayor Jason F. Salento. I have the honor of being Mayor of Dunellen. Before we start tonight's program, I would like to recognize some members in the audience today. We have Council Member Cole Sigmund, Council Member Hal Vandermark, Bill Robbins, our Municipal Clerk and Administrator, and outside we have our Council President, Trina Rios, as well as Council Member Teresa Albertson, and our Board of Education President down there, Noel Gendrano, joining us this evening. So tonight's panel discussion is on cannabis in Dunellen. Just wanted to start this out with a little background for the audience. So as we all know, on February 22nd, 2021, Governor Murphy signed into law a bill that established the legal status of regulated cannabis in New Jersey for individuals of 21 years of age and older. Dunellen voted in favor 2-1. The tally was 2,151 in favor, 1,017 against. So the state has since empowered local municipalities to determine their own regulations and zoning ordinances governing the number, type, and operations of cannabis businesses within their borders. The State Cannabis Regulatory Commission, the CRC, will not issue a license to any of these businesses that would be in violation of a local ordinance or regulation. And no, I know you're going to be touching on this a little later too. So just so everyone's aware, Dunellen has taken the initial step of opting out and not allowing any cannabis-related businesses until a full study can be done of the public opinion and potential regulations that could be best suited for Dunellen if and when we go into allowing it in Dunellen. So as a result, I put together with council support a Mayor's Cannabis Task Force to assist in reviewing the state's regulations and evaluate its impact it may have on the borough of Dunellen. This Cannabis Task Force is created with the following membership: municipal and school officials, business owners, residents, civic organization leaders, and law enforcement. We have some members here this evening, so as I call your name, would you mind standing up and just being recognized, because you've been doing a great job and a hard task on a very serious topic. Teresa Albertson, Mara Carlin, Roger Dornbier, Tara Duggan, Steve Aceto, Isaiah Noel, Gendrano III, Detective Nick Goldman, Melanie Turpick, Harold Vandermark, who is our chair of the task force, Sharonda Weiss-Schimpf, and I sit as an ex officio member. So just to date, the task force has been working together on conducting and evaluating a survey, which you will hear about this evening. It has co-hosted this event to receive further public input and also provide education, and has begun the process to review other municipalities' ordinances, and will begin meeting with the New Jersey Cannabis Commission and other entities to further understand the recreational use and commercialization of cannabis. The task force is comprised of a diverse group of individuals with various backgrounds and qualifications, as well as different perspectives on the topic of cannabis. I purposefully did this so the Mayor's Cannabis Task Force could be representative of our population, be most representative of our population as possible, and could find common ground on how we move forward on the matter of legalizing cannabis in Dunellen. The outcome of the Mayor's Cannabis Task Force will be to determine what regulations and zoning laws, because ultimately this will be coming down to zoning laws, if any at all, would be best for Dunellen, and to make those recommendations to the Mayor and Council, who will then be tasked taking those recommendations and deciding on an ordinance that makes sense for Dunellen. The process does not simply just end there, as the ordinance ultimately, like I said, becomes a zoning law. It'll also be sent over to the Dunellen Planning Board for comments and review before the Mayor and Council make the final decision on this topic and ordinance. So basically what I'm trying to say to you this evening is, by Dunellen opting out for now does not mean we are saying yes or no to the commercialization of cannabis in Dunellen. We are simply taking this step by step and making a sound judgment call on what works best for our Miracle Mile. We all understand you can't take 40 years of don't do drugs, this is a gateway, and just turn it off and turn it on overnight. So we are taking a very prudent approach, using our best judgment call, and that's how we're going to move forward. So tonight's town hall is part of that overall process, and we believe we have a great panel here this evening to discuss with you and educate as well. And we'll go over our survey results, and we'll also have public feedback on those results. We'll hear some of your concerns, and we'll also have questions and answers. So I have the pleasure of also kind of moderating or hosting the panel this evening. We do have at the end Detective Nick Goldman, who will be here at the end to be part of the question and answers if you have questions for law enforcement. But first up, we do have Dunellen Municipal Alliance and Prevention Educational Coordinator, Teresa Albertson. Teresa is a retired educator at the Dunellen High School. She worked there for over 18 years. She's serving in her first year as a borough councilwoman, and she's also, as I said, the Dunellen Municipal Alliance Coordinator. So welcome, Teresa. Terry, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. All right. The Governor's Council on Alcoholism and Drug Abuse was established pursuant to NJSA 26-2BB, from which the Council provides prevention planning, public awareness and education, and administers the Alliance to Prevent Alcoholism and Drug Abuse program. The Council receives funding to administer the program from the Drug Enforcement Demand Reduction Fund, and it's established to collect fines from individuals who are assessed such when convicted of a drug offense or for driving under the influence, and from court costs. The County and Municipal Alliance Award recipients, which is the Dunellen Municipal Alliance is one of them, are required to match the council grants with a cash match of 25% of the award and of 75% in-kind services. This matching requirement is unique in the country and has the effect of doubling the impact of the council grants for programs and activities. County grant awards fund municipal alliances which plan for and develop evidence-based and community-level prevention strategies to target substance abuse in their communities. The mission of the Dunellen Municipal Alliance is to engage a diverse network of residents dedicated to promoting and supporting alcohol and drug prevention strategies in order to reduce youth substance abuse and create a healthy community. We provide prevention education within Dunellen School District for grades 1 through 12. Our teen group, known as SUDS, provides presentations on prevention to grades 1 through 5. This group receives leadership and team building training prior to working with the children, and they also assist in middle school and high school events and activities, as well as community events such as National Night Out, the Harvest Fest, and the Overdose Awareness Ceremony. While a majority of our efforts are youth-oriented, we also do programs for the Dunellen Senior Club, professional development for school staff, town hall meetings such as this one, and provide information on Narcan training. Our main focus is related to youth. We work towards preventing them from having access to alcohol, cigarettes, electronic inhalant devices, also known as vaping, and cannabis. Although these are all legal for those over 21, it is not for those under 21. We need to ensure that this is not made available to them. You can switch the pictures there to the edibles. Many edibles that are available resemble cookies, cereal, candy, and snack foods that children enjoy. There are double stuffed Stonios, Stony Patch Candy, Reefer, and THC Snickers. The packaging is identical, just the name is changed. These need to be carefully stored so that children do not accidentally eat them. If you read the packaging, you see that 1 or 2 bites of the candy or 1 or 2 cookies are all you should have at one time. Children aren't going to read the packaging, and the dose for an adult could be very harmful towards the child, especially younger. So we please ask you to be aware and take the time to keep it where your child can't get at it. We understand that as an adult, you have the right to have these and to have them in your home, share them with your friends, but we do ask you to please be careful. As I said, we work to protect the youth. We do programs just to let them know about things like this, and that it's something that maybe mom and dad or your grandma or grandpa might have, but you need to stay away from it because it could be harmful to you. As we have in the past, we'll work together with the borough to craft ordinances that help protect our children and maintain the family-friendly environment in Dunellen. In the past, we have passed 2 ordinances, one for underage alcohol, and the other one was the vaping ordinance, which had all of the stores that sell vaping materials are now licensed, and should they sell to underage, they can get fined, and if they do it too often, they could actually lose their license. So this is what we do, and we're happy to be working with the borough, and we're happy to see all of you here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. And Terry will be available for questions at the end, too. So just to note, Terry and the Dunellen Municipal Alliance was an advocate and a big stakeholder as we developed our vaping and electronic smoking ordinance. As part of that ordinance, not only is there a hefty fine and an annual license fee, you also can't have that product displayed in the front window. Am I correct? Yes. Okay. So as part of that, as having them at the table, we're hoping if this is developed, they'll be giving us their opinions on how to best keep this out of the reach of children. So thank you, Terry, for your contribution today and as a member of the Dunellen Municipal Alliance. We can change the slide, please. There we go. Okay, next up we have a panel discussion, the panelists discussing cannabis as retail. We have Jacqueline Ferrero. She's an experienced businesswoman, strategic advisor, government affairs advisor, and connector in the cannabis industry. Jackie entered the cannabis space in 2017 when it was widely unpopular, and as an advocate in policy and communications at the New Jersey Cannabis Industry Association. Jackie co-founded Cannabis Advisory Group, a 100% volunteer-based 501c3 not-for-profit, diverse group of professionals with expertise in cannabis policy, regulatory compliance, business, social justice, economics, science, and medicine that are united in the desire to maximize the context for the legal access to cannabis, both in medical and adult use markets. Jackie holds a BA from MSU. She's joined by Hugh O'Byrne. He's an experienced public company executive officer, business consultant, an attorney and cannabis industry thought leader. Hugh collaborates with federal, state, and local public stakeholders on rulemaking and cannabis policy development through his role as a director of policy for the not-for-profit Cannabis Advisory Group, and has previously served as the president of the New Jersey Cannabis Industry Association. Hugh holds his JD from Vanderbilt University Law School and MA from Boston College and a BA from Merrimack College. So welcome to the panel.
Thank you. Great to be here. Do you want me to start? Oh, go ahead.
Do you want me to start? Okay, thank you all for having us. I think we'd give a little bit of context as to why we're here and what retail cannabis as sales in Dunellen can mean. To get to this point, we should think about why cannabis finally became legalized in this state and so many other states. Currently, there are 48 states and all of the territories and the districts of the United States that provide some form of legal access to cannabis or another, and that's grown dramatically over the last 3 years, and it's set to continue to grow. And so why is fundamentally that the case? There's been a number of things, negative side effects to prohibition that took place that caused people to give up the idea that we were going to be able to prohibit cannabis through policing and that would be an effective means of reducing the risks associated with cannabis and the risks around the industry, the illicit industry of cannabis that was going on. Interesting fact is that we began our most recent experience with the legalization of cannabis approximately in 1995, right after the state of California went through the highest and most intense policing effort against cannabis in the late 80s through the early 90s. And I think what it all boils down to, in some respects, and though there are myriad of other considerations around what just took place or what is taking place that has changed people's minds, not necessarily their hearts, but their minds, is they've come to this realization that if we are concerned about people interacting with cannabis, then we really should be thinking about how to regulate it and utilize market dynamics and regulatory authority to de-risk the situation. Why do we say that? Because extensive attempts to prohibit cannabis since 1906 didn't move the needle. And if it did, we'd be able to have a different conversation. I would still be advocating for cannabis to be something that adults could freely choose or to interact with or not, but we're not even there. The attempt across the states in the United States to end cannabis use or even reduce cannabis use appreciably failed. And we certainly are not in a position to try even to attain the prohibition vigor that we expended in the 80s and 90s again. And even in the 80s and 90s, of course, it didn't work. So when that's off the table, we're just not willing to go to the lengths to prohibit cannabis that would be required, which would probably be unconstitutional because it just doesn't work. We still think, okay, so we could say to ourselves, we've made this illegal, and we'll believe that because we've made it illegal, it won't be here. But of course it is here. Look, we have these tremendous organizations that have been fighting substance abuse by children of highly illegal substances, cannabis being the most ubiquitous. Okay, so when we get to this point, we say, okay, well, that hasn't worked, so what's left, right? We could pretend that made a dent on the black market, and that cannabis isn't. New Jersey doesn't currently have a $1 billion black market cannabis industry right now, and has for the last 20 years. So what are we left with? Well, I think is to make the best of de-risking the situation. And what are the major risks with cannabis? Well, the major risks with cannabis, luckily, unlike other substances, aren't with the substance itself, but it's with the industry around the substance, the illicit industry. Often cannabis is sold in conjunction and by people that will sell other harder, much more dangerous drugs or engage in other criminal activity. So I think the thesis that everyone sort of gave into this point, obviously there are other considerations, is let's regulate it. We can't prohibit it, and it's here, and it's coming with a whole bunch of other really negative things, so let's utilize our regulatory authorities and market forces to try and move this product away from the illicit market. And I think that's a big part of what has been going on, though not that thematized. I think people kind of get to that point. So in New Jersey, we did that a couple of years ago. And when that happens, then we've created a context for the cultivation of cannabis products, the manufacturing of cannabis derivatives, and thankfully I can point out, Terry, that the state of New Jersey wisely has made marketing of cannabis to children and creating cannabis goods that mimic foods and things like that highly illegal, so they remain illegal. That's a good thing. Especially because we remain with the problem of how do we actually prohibit this from children, because cannabis is not ideal for children. All right, so we have we have a situation where cannabis is going to be sold in this state. There's a regulatory body that will be involved in on the ongoing licensing and ongoing monitoring of the entire industry on a substantive basis. It's very stringent. It's ongoing. It's pretty heavy-duty stuff that they'll be looking at for retail establishments. When communities like yourselves and of course our state has empowered communities and given great latitude for communities to determine whether or not a business like this makes sense in their community. But there's one caveat. Whether or not you permit a business in this town, you can't prohibit sales in the town. Cannabis can be delivered to anyone in Dunellen, to any home, and can be sold to anyone over 21. That's part of the law. So let's talk about what that leads to is a context where we're looking at, okay, we'll have statewide sales, but we're going to have stores, right, that will be seeking to come to your town and asking to be a corporate citizen. And the retail establishments are, I don't know if anyone's been to any of them around, but they're actually quite sophisticated, quite actually boring inside when you get to it. All cannabis is prepackaged in child-proof packaging. There is no bins of cannabis lying around. There's man traps. When you walk into the facilities, you're checked in by security, your ID is examined. You go and you make your sale and you leave, and your packaged goods are put into a further package. You're not allowed to open it or consume it on the premises, et cetera. There's extensive security requirements. There's cameras. There's personnel. It's an ongoing basis for doing these types of things. And that's to provide, and I'll have Jackie talk about that situation. One of the things that the state has done, besides allowing municipalities to have great latitude in the time, place, and manner, and to whether or not to have any particular type of cannabis business in their community, is that it allows the town to levy a 2% tax on revenues from the cannabis establishments. And those revenues can be considerable. Right now in the state, our most robust selling dispensary is doing probably about up to $5 million a month. Some are doing around, right now, probably the average is somewhere around $2 million. Eventually, we could see a long glide path where we'll see $1 million. The state, despite news about the velocity of licensing that's gone out the door, in actuality, will have a pretty modest number of stores that actually ever get open. With that said, that's the deal. We're going to have, that's what's being looked at. Now, for the process of what a community would need to, and so we're talking about that 2%. Dunellen residents will have access to cannabis in Dunellen, whether it's going to a store in Dunellen or whether it's having a store in another town or a delivery service in another town deliver into Dunellen. The difference is between having a store, one of the differences between having a store in the town and not having a store in the town is the 2% revenues for sales out of your store to Dunellen and other residents would be retained by the municipality, where in a delivery context, that capital would flow into the other municipality. So it's sort of a decision along those lines. With that said, I get to the point where I'm like, well, the idea that we're not going to have a cannabis facility in our town, one reason I think a bad reason for saying no would be the idea that you would reduce the number of sales, or you would reduce the potential exposure of cannabis to children or others. I don't think that that's a ultimately credible concern. There are, however, other concerns that are real and things that people should look at. When I talk about stores that are doing between $2 and $5 million a month, we're talking about facilities that have while providing good revenues to the town, is actually potentially burdening the infrastructure and the resources of the municipality, especially if cannabis isn't situated in a thoroughfare where there's access to parking. It's those types of considerations that I would recommend the Cannabis Task Force, among other things, consider if they're going to go down to the point, if they're going to recommend to the municipality to take action, that you look for properly situated cannabis facilities. But there's more to that, and I'll let Jackie talk about the ordinance and what you might be looking for.
Thank you, Hugh. First off, thank you, Mayor and Terry. We're in the town of Dunellen. We're so happy to be here. I just have a quick question for everybody. Has anyone in the audience been in a dispensary? Two? Been in one of the dispensaries at all? Okay. So it's certainly, Hugh and I co-hosted a trip for the legislators, Speaker Coughlin, and also at the time Senate President Sweeney, to go out to Colorado and Nevada and tour facilities, distribution center, grow, and also retail. And it was certainly eye-opening, because we all have that image of what this looks like. Are people hanging around outside smoking pot? Do you just walk in and grab, like Hugh said, grab something, the product out of a container, or what does it really look like? So I encourage you, if you ever have a chance, to swing by an adult use dispensary. I think the closest one here is in Woodbridge. That's Air Wellness. A Garden State. And just go in and check it out, because it certainly is eye-opening when you see that it is not what you may think it is in terms of being irresponsible, or can children under 21 get into these dispensaries. It's certainly lockdown mode. When consumers and even patients walk into a dispensary, they are not alone at any turn. They're checked in, their IDs are checked, they're brought into the dispensary floor, they speak to a consultant, a patient coordinator if need be, and they're really, they navigate through very graciously with the coordinators at the dispensary. So I encourage you to do that. But with that said, we've worked with a lot of towns throughout the state and over the years, actually, and bring us to today when now towns, well, really over the last year, towns are faced with, what do we do? What's the best way for us to move forward with an ordinance? We may opt out and consider conversations down the line to opt back in. And what does that look like? A lot of towns have opted out, but currently having conversations to opt back in. And it depends on the landscape of the town. For example, in Newark, New Brunswick, Patterson, Jersey City, bigger cities are really open for cannabis businesses. Not only is it good for social equity folks, women, Black, brown, veterans, because it is a city-like area, and it really gives folks an opportunity to have their own business and partake into the cannabis industry. And we have smaller towns, Dunellen, some Bergen County towns, some Sussex County towns, smaller, that are what will work best. There's maybe not a lot of zoning, there's maybe not a lot of area where a business can be where it's away from a church or it's away from a school. Many of the ordinances that I've seen are 200 feet to 500 feet from any of the establishments that I just mentioned. So that's something to consider, the task force should consider as well. Also, application. If and when you do opt in and you allow retail, what part of town is it going to make sense in? A lot of times, towns are doing one or two, small to mid-sized towns are allowing 1 to 2 retail, even some cultivation if there are light industrial parks within the town. So these are all things to think about. In terms of a process, we've seen a lot of towns have a smaller 4-page application, because obviously you're going to want to know who's operating in your town. What does this cannabis company offer? What's their background? Who's involved, et cetera, et cetera. So these are just some things to think about. Certainly you don't have to reinvent the wheel. We see some large, lengthy applications that could be really tedious too on the town when it comes to an application process. Because whatever you offer, folks are definitely going to apply, and there's going to be a lot that the task force is going to have to go through in terms of an application process. So the other thing to think about is timelines. Some towns have a process where they release their application, just throw say October 1st, and all applications are due back on October 30th. So they open it and close the application process. So we've seen there's no right way or wrong way. We've seen all different ways that towns are going about allowing cannabis businesses in town. So, but I'm certainly looking forward to your questions and how we can be helpful, and hopefully you learn a little bit more when you walk out of here.
Thank you, Jacqueline and Hugh, and we look forward to our Q&A session shortly. So next up, we have Noel Gendrano. He will be overseeing and discussing the Mayor's Cannabis Task Force survey results and also additional public input based upon these results.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just going to move over here so that I can actually see the slides as well.
I didn't get to introduce your qualifications.
Sorry?
Noel is our Board of Education president. He's a Dunellen resident. He's a clinical scientist at Merck & Co., and he is a graduate of UMDNJ School of Public Health, where he received his PhD in epidemiology.
Wow.
Now the floor is yours.
You looked me up. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I will be taking you through the survey and the results of the survey. And as Mayor Salento had mentioned, I'm glad that you mentioned a little bit about myself, because I think it's important to know who's presenting or who's giving you the data. It's important to know the source as well as who's providing this information to you. So indeed, I did get my PhD from Rutgers University in public health. As an epidemiologist, I worked with data all day long. In fact, I've been a clinical scientist for the last 27 years, the first 10 of which in academia at Rutgers, and the last 17 at a major pharmaceutical company. And so suffice to say, I do look at data a lot. But I think that as we walk through this survey, I want you to understand that I'm also a Dunellen resident, and we are looking at this together. Okay, we're looking at this together. I would like you to take the time as we go through the slides to think about what they mean, come up with questions. Hopefully this will be the catalyst to start discussions on various points. And I hope that in our session this evening that we are able to have a robust discussion, answer questions, any question that you may have. And in my book, there are no dumb questions. They're just questions waiting to be answered. So I hope that this presentation will help spark that, and we're able to have a nice, robust discussion. Guys, you can hear me okay? Am I speaking loud enough? Okay. Better now? Okay. I don't want to go too loud. So, Mr. Petzingers, please. So before we jump into the survey, I wanted to give a shout out to the other members of the Cannabis Task Force. Mayor Salento mentioned them by name earlier, but I wanted to put it up here on the screen as well so you could see who's participated in this. Next slide, please, Mr. Petzinger. So just a little bit of background, and some of this may have already been mentioned, but just to, it definitely does bear repeating. So back on February 22nd of 2021, Governor Murphy signed into law a bill establishing the legal status of regulated cannabis. And in New Jersey, this is for folks, or individuals 21 years of age and older. So the state has empowered local municipalities to determine their own regulations, to come up with those zoning ordinances governing the number, type, and operations of cannabis businesses within their borders. So it's on us, right, to come up with this. The State Cannabis Regulatory Commission, the CRC, they won't issue a license to any cannabis-related business that would be in violation of any local ordinance or regulation. So, and lastly, as Mayor Salento has mentioned, Dunellen has taken that initial step of opting out and not allowing any cannabis-related businesses until a full study has been done of public opinion and potential regulations. And that part, I think I would like to just underscore, because we need to make this decision together as a group. We need to hear everybody's voice on this. Okay, this is not a small decision to make, and it is an important choice, important decision. And we want to make sure that everyone has that opportunity to say what they want to say. No matter what it is, say what you need to say. We have to have that discussion. Okay, Mr. Petzinger, next slide, please. Sir? Okay. As the mayor mentioned, the task force itself, just to give you a little bit of background, is comprised of community members ranging from municipal and school officials, business owners, residents, civic organization leaders, as well as law enforcement. And the purpose of this task force to assist in reviewing the state's regulations and evaluate its impact that it may have on the borough of Dunellen. The survey that we're going to talk about and go through in just a moment is part of that overall process, seeking input from citizens and businesses to determine what regulations the mayor and borough council should establish for our community as it relates to the commercialization of recreational cannabis. Mr. Petzinger, sir. So, what's this survey? So the survey was a 15-item tool that was used to gather information from our Dunellen community on perspectives regarding having a cannabis business in town. The survey itself was opened in July of 2022, just this past summer, and responses were collected through August of 2022. The survey was available online and was also available via paper completion. So there was ample opportunity to complete the survey. Sorry? Oh, and in Spanish too. Sí. The invitations to complete the survey were made via social media outlets as well as direct emails through those described through Dunellen Community distribution list. So basically there was a lot of opportunity to be able to participate in the survey if you wanted to. Again, that's if you wanted to. And in that effort, there were a total of 281 participants who completed the survey. Okay, remember that number, 281, because that's going to come back again and again. The first slide here, we're talking about who participated in the survey, okay? So before we jump into the numbers, you can see them in big numbers there. The response rate, as I mentioned, was 281, and that represents about 4.4% of the approximately 6,400 Dunellen residents and community members who could have participated. Okay, so the kids are not in that number. These are folks that could have actually filled out the survey. Okay, and to also note that in the subsequent slides, you'll see little notations for margin of error. Those were calculated with a 95% confidence interval, so you have an ideal. Just like when we see in those polls on television, you have a percentage, and then, how tight is that? Well, there's a little bit of error. The margin of error, 5%, 6%, whatever. Those are noted in the slides themselves. So just to give you some reference as we move forward in this presentation. So upper left, question 1, who are we? Of the 281 respondents, 88.6% were Dunellen residents. And as you can see, there's a steep drop off after that from visitor shoppers and others. Question 2, right? How old are we? Or what's the demographic, that age demographic in our survey? The majority of folks were between the ages of 35 and 50. That's the 45.2%. But to say that more so that around 82%, roughly, of participants or folks that responded to the survey were between the ages of 26 and 50. So as you can see, very heavily weighted or skewed towards that latter age. Mr. Petzinger, sir. So in terms of support of cannabis-related business, I did actually go out of order here for a second, but to make a point, question 3 and question 7, the different responses here, and they look at it from different perspectives. And what I mean by that is, question 3, our survey asked the question, did you vote to support the New Jersey state cannabis law, right? And 60.9 or 61% said yes. Well, again, of the 281, 32.7% said no. And that is roughly, with a margin of error about 5.5%, roughly about a 2-to-1 ratio, okay? 2 yeses for every 1 no. I highlight that because from the 2020 statewide referendum on legalizing cannabis, now that's the statewide, right, vote, Dunellen voted 2151 to 1017, which was 67.9% to 32.1%. That's important because essentially what we're saying is that our numbers here from our survey align with what we saw from the state voter rolls, okay? So 2-to-1 again, right? Question 7, do you support Dunellen allowing any cannabis-related businesses within its borders? So now we get very direct with this question. Now we're seeing a 55.9 to 44.1% difference. To me, with the margin of error, that's essentially a 1-to-1 ratio in the way that I see that. So just to highlight and underscore the point here in question 3, do we support overall in New Jersey, the cannabis law? Yes, 2-to-1. But when it comes to having it in our own town, that 2-to-1 reduces to 1-to-1, okay? Move along, Mr. Petzinger. Question 4, if you voted in support of the cannabis industry, why? So 75.1% said you support use of cannabis, you support cannabis use. 61.3% said you anticipated the tax revenue income, okay? And 49.7% said you wanted convenience for consumers. The remaining 20% were other, and you voted to support it statewide but didn't want it locally. So as you can see, the top 2 or the top 3 stand out as to reasons for why folks seem to be in favor of the cannabis industry. Next slide, please. Question 5, do you believe cannabis-related businesses in Dunellen would have a positive or negative impact on the downtown? Businesses, activities, safety, vibrancy, et cetera. Now this number, remember 281 was our overall, 279 answered this question. So positive to negative, 44.4 to 45.9. To me, that's a 50-50 split essentially with the margin of error. Again, 1-to-1, right down the middle. Next slide, please. If you are a business owner in Dunellen, do you believe a cannabis-related business would have a positive or negative impact on your business? Now, this particular question, in fact, I kind of discount in a way, considering the fact that of the, remember, 281 folks who responded overall to the questionnaire, only 238 responded to this question, and of those 238, 207 said, this doesn't apply to me. So there's a very small number of folks that actually did respond. 31, I believe, if the math is correct, 31 off the top of my head. But essentially, the numbers I think are too small to really, to make sense of this or really extract any kind of something out of this. Mr. Petzinger. Question 8. If you supported cannabis-related business within Dunellen borders, what benefits do you believe allowing these businesses will bring? What do you think? What's the upside, right? What are the positives? Number 1, very loudly, and again, this is select. This isn't an independent choice. This is select all that apply, right? So of this question, 161 people of the 281 responded to this question, and of those 161, overwhelmingly 93.2% said money, revenue. 78.9, economic development. 58.4, health and health equity. And 41.6% social justice and criminal justice. So to me, that's, even with the margins of error, those are pretty strong words, I think, that the survey is telling us. Even though it's 161 folks, that's still a pretty strong message of why, you know, we see this as a positive. Next slide, sir. Question 9. If you did not support cannabis-related businesses within Dunellen borders, why do you think cannabis-related businesses should be prohibited from Dunellen? So 71.5% said increase in crime, public safety issues, theft, impaired driving. That's number 1. Number 2, youth consumption, impact of child development, social emotional impact, new drivers. That's 66.9%. And third, public health and welfare, public odors, traffic congestion, cleanliness, sorry for the misspelling, cleanliness of streets, 57.0%. And with those margin of errors, that's still a very strong message from the other perspective. Again, 151 folks responded of the initial 281. Next slide, please, sir. Question 10. Which of these recreational cannabis businesses would you support operating in Dunellen? And if you answered, that was a no to question 7, that was the one on if you want, you know, to yes or no on cannabis businesses in town, please answer what you feel we'd be the most comfortable with. Again, this is select all that apply. Pretty strongly, 70% said retailer, followed by delivery at 64.1%, and then cultivator, grower at 52.5%. And as you can see, as we go further down the list, the numbers come down, but the trend for sure, retailer, delivery, more leaning in that direction. And anything over 50%, that's the 52.5, the cultivator grower, that's also the top 3. Next slide, please. Okay, I added this slide, or we added this slide to kind of give you background on the next question, because we're going to ask about where would you want this business potentially to be if you were to go forward. Now, I know the map is a little, you know, probably a little bit hard to see, but just to direct your attention to the bottom left corner, and guys, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm colorblind, so correct me if I misstate the color. Bottom left, that's yellow, followed by, next to that, adjacent to that is green, right? Red, okay, thank you. Red, dang, red-green colorblindness. Moving further northeast, blue, thank you. And then green, okay. I did learn my colors when I was younger. I just can't see them. Those rods and cones are all messed up. So to orient you to where that is on the map, the yellow, right? That's basically Sanford Avenue west to Middlesex, the red, thank you, Sanford Avenue to, I think it's about Madison. The blue is from Washington, northeast to, I think it's Jefferson, I believe, right? Jackson, sorry, thank you, Jackson. It's on the next slide, so I didn't peek. And there's a little, I'm sorry, can you go back, Mr. Petzinger? Sorry. On Washington, there's about 3/4 of a block, I believe, probably up to, on Washington there, up to probably about, would you say the Dunellen Hotel, Rathskeller, roughly? But right before Front Street hits. And then green, Jackson, all the way through to Plainfield. The circles or the funny-looking shapes that are shaded in there, those are the drug-free school zones. So we can't obviously have anything in those areas, but those represent, for the next question, what we were asking about, where would you want this to be potentially if we were to place this? Next slide, please, sir. So now, question 11, from that map we just looked at, right? Would you prefer a cannabis-related business operator? Where would you prefer, which area? And again, this is select all that apply. Remember, of the 281, remember that number, 281, 227 folks responded to this question. Loudly, green zone. Remember green zone? That was Jackson, on North Avenue, Jackson to Plainfield, right? There we go, upper right corner there. Could you go back? Thank you. Yellow zone, 63%. That's again Sanford to the Middlesex border, right? So basically, the bookends of North Ave is where he's at. And then blue and red were kind of a 50-50 split, or split roughly, or about the same, I should say. Not split, but about the same in terms of folks indicating that. So I guess if you were going to, look at these numbers, green zone is where the preference would be, pretty loudly. Next slide, please, sir. Question 12. Oh, sorry about that. Question 12. Should a cannabis retailer business be limited to purchase only, for example, takeout, or purchase and use on site, for example, takeout and or site consumption? So purchase only, 52.5%. Both purchase as well as on-site consumption, 41.5%. And on-site consumption only was not very popular. And again, this is 241 participants out of the 281. Okay, next slide, please, sir. So I'm going to read through this because this one's a little lengthy. So the state of New Jersey allows for a maximum of a 2% sales tax to be collected by the municipality on each cannabis transaction, which we've noted earlier in the discussion here. For example, $1 million in sales would generate $20,000 for the borough, from which salaries or for additional personnel, tax collections, public safety would be required. Does such a sales tax impact your support of cannabis business in Dunellen, right? So does that sales tax, how does it impact your support of the cannabis business? 51.3%, and again, this is 273 of the 281 responding. Of the 273, 51.3%, or just a little over half, said, no, it would not impact my support for or against. 30.4% said, yeah, I would be more in favor. And 18.3% did not have an opinion either way. Now, with the margins of error as they are, they're all pretty much, separate. There's not very much overlap. So that, I think it's pretty clear what that signal was trying to tell us. Next slide, please, sir. Now, to put it all together, Dunellen residents' response to the referendum on cannabis-related businesses was about 2-to-1 in favor of the cannabis-related businesses. Remember, we made that point earlier at the beginning. Dunellen residents responded to the current town survey on cannabis-related businesses in town. That's the one where we're saying now that we, having a business in town, actually in town, not just in somewhere in New Jersey, but actually here in town, that 2-to-1 went to 1-to-1, neither for nor against. Third point, of the Dunellen residents who did indicate support for cannabis-related businesses, that support was based on money, right? Anticipated revenue, very strong. Economic development, also very strong. And health, significant. For Dunellen residents who favor cannabis-related businesses in town, support appears to be heavily dependent on revenue to Dunellen. That's an economic advantageous stance, right? But that should not come, this came through, by the way, not just in the numbers, but also in comments that were also seen in the survey as well, that should not come at the expense of quality of life, as there was a strong community response to maintain the family-oriented atmosphere that currently exists in Dunellen. So again, trying to be as unbiased as possible so you could make your own decision, make your own choice, come up with your own opinion on this so that we can have a discussion on this. This is what we came up with from the survey that we put out, the data that we gathered, we put it together into what we just showed you, and we're presenting it to you now basically for you to digest. And at this point, I will, next slide, please. Any questions? Right. Right. No, I definitely understand. But I agree. I wouldn't say that exactly. What I would say that is I think that the information that we just gave as a group should be taken into consideration. It shouldn't be final decision. Like, it's something that needs to be taken into consideration as we're deciding. The 4.4% is not nothing. 4.4% says of the folks that did actually step up and participate, this is how they felt, right? Agree, 4.4% is not, I mean, in an ideal world, everybody would have voted. Does that ever happen? No. Even percentage-wise, you're not going to get a lot of folks, typically they're going to answer surveys. It's very difficult to get folks to respond to surveys. But I think what the 4.4% tells us is that we have information from people that did respond. This is how we're trending. This is how we're feeling. And it's a point of data in the larger pool of data, right? So based on that, based on opinions or things that other folks are aware of, that all that gets taken into consideration. It's not the end point, it's a point amongst all the data that we do have. And quite frankly, it's better than nothing, not having and just guessing and making a decision. I would love to have more data, honestly. I would love to actually be able to have more data. As an epidemiologist, I would love to see more data, but this is, unfortunately, this is what we have. This is how our town participated. Oh, sorry, Mr. Osborne.
I would initially suggest to you that the low turnout may very well be a product of general disinterest one way or the other.
True.
But I have a question with respect to basement facilities based on the survey.
Sorry, 1 second, Mr. Osborne. Can everybody hear him? Okay. The virtual world. Maybe?
If you don't mind, repeat the question.
Yes. Sorry, so I just want to make sure you're able to be heard as well.
Hello, virtual world.
Hello, Mr. Osborne.
I had a couple of questions with respect to some of the survey and some of the information that you were providing. And the first question I'm going to direct to Terry Albertson. Not to put you on the spot or anything like that, but let me ask you a question. From your experience, particularly professionally, is alcohol a drug? It's a very easy question to answer, and the answer is yes. Alcohol is a drug.
Yeah.
The drug-free school zones, how many bars and how many liquor stores fall within those zones? How many bars and liquor stores do we have at all, Mr. Mayor?
Bars and liquor stores, we probably got about, Bill would know this better as a clerk, but I'm going to say we probably have about 13 liquor licenses in town. Am I wrong on that number? Between
that's-
restaurants and liquor stores and social organizations.
I'm not looking for an exact number, okay?
Well, you asked the question.
But I
my
would,
friend.
I know, but I'm not looking for an exact number. And how many of those would you estimate? Perhaps half? perhaps even more, fall within drug-free school zones?
Based upon that number, looking at that map, probably 2 or 3.
Yeah. 2 or 3?
Yeah, let's go back to the map. I'll name them right now for you. If you want to go that detailed, we will.
Well, all right. So let's.
Zopco's is at least one.
Let's just say 2 or 3. It's
Okay.
fine. It's not relevant. But my point is that you got a drug-free school zone, which is actually created as a law enforcement tool to increase penalties and decrease the potential of people acting within those zones because of the fear of children being involved. Right, it's a criminal. Its function is to deter criminal activity. The use of marijuana is no longer a criminal activity. In the same way alcoholism. Okay, so drug-free school zones are not relevant. They're not relevant, at least from my perspective. But really, what it comes down to is that you have the ability to promote a business, and to promote a business that has the potential of being a great deal more secure in terms of the community and in terms of the ability of underage people getting access, at least through those facilities, than you do with alcohol. And really, it seems to me to be a simple, favorable response to allow this to occur. Now, I absolutely agree with you that holding off until appropriate consideration is a great idea. Because once you commit, you're committed for what, 5 years?
Yes, and so basically what happened is when the law was passed, towns had, just for historical background and context, we had 180 days to opt in or opt out. If you opt in, you were in. If you didn't opt out, you were in. So if you opt out, you have the opportunity to opt back in. So this is why we've taken this approach, which I appreciate you saying this was a smart tool, because we're not saying through this task force or through this survey that we're not going to do this. We're just,
it's not going to happen tomorrow.
Exactly. And so, and at the time when the borough opted out too, I'm not going to give my personal opinion in the sense of, well, no, I do think the cart was put before the horse. There was no real regulations or guidelines at the time. So a lot of towns, including Dunellen, opted out until these things were put into place, which they are starting to come out in more detail, which is good now, which this task force will have the opportunity through professionals such as Jacqueline and Hugh and the New Jersey Cannabis Commission to review and consider what works best for Dunellen.
Right.
So
what I'm finally ending up with, and I'll give this up for the night, is a question that I'm going to direct at the two of you, because of the group here, I think probably you have the most experience and the most knowledge with respect to cannabis-based industries, whether they be manufacturing or retail or whatever, than anybody else in the room. In your opinion, based on your experience, and in terms of both public safety and in particular with respect to the potential of underage individuals getting access, would you consider a bar or liquor store as having better or worse security for those purposes than the average cannabis retailer at this point in time?
Worse, and I think that's demonstrable. I think that's worse. Things, for instance, that we saw at the beginning that Terry put up with respect to just items that are marketed towards children. Those are often black market examples that are put on those that we just saw. That's not allowed in New Jersey. It's not allowed really in hardly any states, the rigorous compliance. But if you go into a liquor store, you'll see cotton candy vodka, right? You'll see any number of things that are designed to mix or conflate childhood tastes and experiences with alcohol. You're also dealing with a scintilla of the amount of security that a cannabis retailer would have. Not a whole lot of alcohol comes in childproof containers. There aren't on-site security guards in most alcohol stores. Right, if they are there for shoplifting, exactly. You're not checked, your ID isn't checked to be an admittance in most places, right? All of these things, plus more, are absolutely the regime in which a cannabis retailer in this state, and quite frankly in most states, have to abide by. And also the amount of resources and the amount of substantive regulation and investigation that a cannabis operation has to go through is a significant multiple of what the ABC would do with respect to any liquor establishment. So I think you're entirely correct. This is absolutely a situation where liquor, which is far more prevalent, is on its own grounds far more deleterious as a substance for a youth or for an adult, has more negative social impacts than cannabis, right? I'm not saying cannabis has none, but this is just sort of facts, right? And yet they're all over the place. And as you see, we have these drugs-free school zones, which luckily are not necessarily, I mean, you could choose in this town, if you decided to go forward with a cannabis ordinance, to abide by the drugs-free school zone, but it's not something that's required at the state level anymore. So, like you said, you might have, my hometown of Princeton, I was on the Cannabis Task Force. The town elected to continue to opt out for the time being. One of the considerations was schools. And I think the Cannabis Task Force said, 200 feet, right, which is consonant with the liquor law for package stores, as well as the small amount of state regulations around cannabis. And people were aghast at the idea that there might be a cash and carry store selling childproof packaged goods to people within eyesight of a school. But of course, right across from the largest elementary school in Princeton is the largest bar, like literally across the street. And it just sort of seems to me strange that was the concern, because the bar has people going in and out, right? And so anyway, that's just some of the problems that we have with dealing with this emerging cannabis phenomena, is that it's probably our great-grandparents that lived in an environment in New Jersey that had robust access to commercial cannabis, right? From 1876 to probably 1922, there was lots of access to cannabis. Hashish was very popular. There was no significant attacks on it from the government that came later after Prohibition failed. These were big businesses. It was going. There were Reed Harper's from 1886, tour of a hashish lounge in New York City, right? Something that the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire donated to the Philadelphia's World Fair of 1876 to enhance the experience. Caught on. It was popular. So our great-grandparents lived in an environment where cannabis was readily available as alcohol. Listen to early jazz lyrics, for instance, you'll see that was a fact. But at least since 1970, and the bizarre situation around the Controlled Substances Act, we've lived in a regime of a context that has consistently reinforced, in some respects, a non-truth, and in many respects, half-truths, that cannabis is a very, very dangerous substance. When I first started getting involved with trying to advocate for cannabis and saying it was sort of strange to me that we were putting people in jail and depriving them of their liberty and property over a flower, in 1989, it was a much different context. We used to have brain on drugs, and people would say that cannabis destroyed brain cells. But of course, that came from a falsified government study that took them 10 years to admit they falsified. But nevertheless, we were all conditioned into that. And even though we've emerged, right, at least legally, and in some parts of the country, people are like, what's the big deal? Because now they've been living with it, again, in a legal context. No one seems to care a whole lot in Oregon, California, and Colorado. Not that there aren't outlying problems, but no one's trying to put the toothpaste back in the tube in those jurisdictions, and that's far more prevalent there. But we sort of live with this hangover from prohibition of cannabis, where you don't really have anyone in living memory alive that was around cannabis before it was prohibited. So we're all weirded out by it because we were told, like you pointed out, drug-free school zone. Somehow it didn't include alcohol, right? And so this is just sort of the context that we live in. I get it. Even I feel weird sometimes around cannabis establishments or cannabis, and it's just kind of how we've been conditioned, very consistently, very consciously.
I thank you. So I'm very appreciative that you actually talked about the criminalization and now decriminalization of this herb, which is called cannabis. I know, Jacqueline, is that your name? When you had asked if anyone had been to a dispensary. I have gone to one in support of a family member who has a debilitating illness, and it was for medicinal purposes. And it was like Fort Knox with regards to access and ID and security, physical security, camera security, and the ID had to be from New Jersey and not from another state or jurisdiction. So the benefits, especially for the medicinal users and the medical usage, is now being expanded to recreation. It still has the same positive impact, whether you have a debilitating condition or not. I do have some of the same mirrored issues with regards to the sample size. 4.4 is very small, but the electorate spoke with the referendum on election day. So it's the electorate of the residents of Dunellen that said that at least it's something that we should explore. Again, the small sample size is not very representative, but it's those who chose to participate in the survey and give their feedback. This town hall is the first step and a big step in getting more community feedback, input, having discourse. I am concerned with one of the survey results in the questions with regards to on-site usage. Again, I just have reservations about that. We're a miracle mile. So anywhere where the dispensary or facility would be, you could walk home. Just something to think about. Not to say that folks aren't already walking around under the influence, and I'm not getting contact highs on the sidewalks in Dunellen, because that is happening already. But to regulate it in a way and to approve it in a way and to create an ordinance and zoning that allows for that, that is something I think we should explore a little bit further. I would definitely like to get feedback from the two experts on the panel about best practices, about if other locations are doing them both, just a delivery or a package as well as on-site. So that's the first part of the question. I'm going to give it the mic, but I do have some other thoughts later on.
Great. So great point on the medical aspect. When I first got into the cannabis industry as an advocate for the helping with the expanded medical bill here in New Jersey, I really learned a lot from patients who really have grown to rely on cannabis, whether it be for cancer patients, and there are so many different methods. It's not just smoking flower. There's a few different methods that can be utilized. I have cancer patients. I have a friend who, her daughter has epileptic seizures, and actually Jake Hogan, what the bill was focused on. You know, when you look at these patients that are really getting a lot of relief from cannabis, especially in the adult use end of things, where anxiety and sleep disorders are like the top of the list of folks that seek cannabis. And, you know, it's an alternative to pharmaceutical drugs, right? So why can't an individual have that option if they so choose? And many folks do not want to go to the pharmaceutical route. You know, these opioid crisis, there's a lot that comes with that. We all know about that. So this is, you know, something that's really helpful to the patients. And just to really add on to Hugh's answer to your question, and you mentioned how it's like Fort Knox, a liquor store, you walk by a liquor store, you can see the liquor bottles. You can just walk by and see it all. In a dispensary, it's all regulated where the product cannot be out front in a storefront, you know, for advertisement. And the security piece with I have a client up in North Jersey who has 30 cameras in their dispensary. So it often helps solve crimes. So there's a lot of benefits to a dispensary. And plus, you know, we talked about this in the past about being a good neighbor. You know, as a cannabis operator, we see that folks we're combating the stigma. So it's almost like it has to be overcompensated, and being a good neighbor is one way to do that. So it benefits the town.
To your question on social consumption, first of all, the state on October 27th will release the first regulations with regard to social consumption. Yeah, it's on its way. Now, the only communities that I'm aware of that have embraced, or at least have been open about embracing the concept of social consumption, is Atlantic City and Jersey City. Yeah, right, and I think those communities have look, I feel pretty ambiguous about social consumption, because in the United States, as far as a regulated phenomena, we don't have much. We have West Hollywood, Nevada, Las Vegas is supposed to get going with it. We haven't had it. Our biggest experiment is one of our longest experiments with legal access to cannabis is in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. It's been open since 1971, and it's a big hit with the Dutch police. Are pretty happy about it. However, you know, I just don't know what to, maybe it's that prohibition hangover. I just feel a little weird about it. I have some concerns about people going to a location, imbibing, and driving. I mean, I'm an advocate, but I still see, like, that's not a non-issue, right? It is a real issue. We should be somewhat cognizant of it. So I don't know what to make of that just yet. And I wish, like with so many other examples, there's so much to look at data-wise and so many other anecdotes. Here we just don't have a lot. So
And then public housing.
yeah, like I get it in the medical context. But I don't know. I don't want to.
Yeah, I would agree on that.
I don't
with
want to be a
consumption.
problem.
But in some of the urban, some of the urban towns, cities, they allow for consumption, even throughout the country, due to public housing, where consumption is not allowed. So it gives patients an opportunity to go somewhere to safely consume.
Hugh, in terms of your concern for social consumption, because clearly you can drink at a bar and, like Mr. Osborne's point was, and get into a car and drive, is maybe necessarily, and this is a good question for, you know, a hint towards law enforcement, is there's really no way to test cannabis in the system at the moment.
Correct.
If you're pulled over.
That is correct. And Detective Goldman's really best situated to talk about DREs and things like that, but breathalyzers are, I imagine, a handy tool. With cannabis, there's a mouth swab that is in FDA trials, but that takes forever. And also there is, while cannabis tends to affect your motor skills and your judgment less acutely than alcohol does, it still does have it. And then there's a problem with the half-life of cannabis. Cannabis doesn't degrade in your system concomitantly with its effect on you like alcohol does. So cannabis has like a half-life that's far longer than its effects on your body. So it's really difficult.
I could elaborate on that slightly. I'll give you the super condensed version. But basically, the way that we would treat somebody impaired under cannabis or any drug or alcohol, a lot of it is the same in the beginning path. We need to prove that the person is operating the vehicle. We need to prove that they're demonstrating some level of impairment with standardized field sobriety tests. And that's the same regardless of what I may feel is the substance that's impairing you. They'll be placed under arrest. They're brought to our headquarters. They blow in the alco test. I may know full well that it's not alcohol. They still blow in the alco test. If they blow intoxicated, they blow over an 08, it ends there. That's a DWI. That's de facto by law Beyond that, now we feel it's something else, we would reach out to a specialized officer who's gone to like a month of training in recognizing drug training and impairment by drugs, including marijuana. They would perform an evaluation. Usually there's a blood or urine sample given. Sometimes a warrant's obtained to take that forcefully, and that's the end of the processing. But it adds a whole lot to the end of the processing compared to alcohol. But a lot of it is the same throughout.
If I may, sorry, Ms. Turner, because just to address one of your points, and also because the gentleman that you asked the first question, it wasn't heard on the, I don't think it was heard on over virtually, but I just wanted to address that point about the sample size, and we'll come back to that in a second. But I hear you, I understand you, and the 281 is what we have, but I think that when you're looking at the survey, to put it into the context of it's not a definitive thing, but it gives you an indication of trend. It gives you an indication of where the direction people are going. It may not say like definitively one, but it gives you an idea of folks who did respond, kind of the direction that they're going. So I think, as I mentioned to the gentleman earlier, we look at this as one data point amidst the other data points that we take into consideration when we're moving forward. But I did want to just go back to, you don't have to move this, Mr. Petzinger, but there was a point on the slide that I had made earlier that of the 281 folks that did participate, there were I believe it was roughly around a 2-to-1 ratio within Dunellen. In the survey, within the survey was a 2-to-1 ratio. And I paired that with the fact from the 2020 referendum, right? The numbers weren't exact, but it was also pretty much a 2-to-1. Comparable. Exactly. So if that number was 1-to-1 or something else like 3-to-1, then I would have to question, well, is what we're the folks that voted in 2020, are they kind of in the same direction as the folks that voted in the survey, right? I would have questions with that. But the fact that it was pretty close in that 2-to-1, it says to me that at least there's a direction, right? A trend going that way. Sir.
Yeah, thank you. This live? Okay. The question, you keep bringing up the point of a 2-to-1 ratio. I voted for that bill when it came up in the New Jersey state legislation because of the penalties for criminalizing the people who were using it, who got caught, and I didn't think that was fair. Okay? So that number that you keep throwing out isn't valid for the reasons that you're bringing them here today. Okay? There are a lot of people voted for that bill because they wanted to decriminalize it, to take the penalties away from people who were using it. The police department, question for you. What would you do if somebody was walking around town smoking a joint? It's not illegal. It's not illegal. Anybody could walk around town smoking a joint or a pipe with wacky weed in it. For Jackie, not Jackie, I'm sorry, Terry, the Dunellen Community Association is tasked with protecting the youth of Dunellen. Okay? Do you think that this is a good idea to have a dispensary in town?
It's for adults, and that's fine. We just, in my organization, we just want to protect the children and make sure that just like any place else, they can't go in and they can't buy cigarettes, they can't buy vaping materials. We want to make sure that they aren't able to go in and buy anything. Or we also do a program called Sticker Shock, where we tell people it's illegal to buy alcohol for somebody under 21 and then hand it to them.
And
so it would be that same
It?
idea.
That has stopped it?
It has made more people aware of it.
Has it stopped it?
No, it has not stopped it. But, we did it for a couple of years. We had COVID. Now we're back to doing it again. And we just, bit by bit, we hope that we'll make a difference.
In my day, when I was in high school, I could get liquor anytime I wanted it. In fact, we had some great parties, okay? I wasn't old enough to buy liquor, but I was able to get it. And I don't do vape, so I don't worry about that. So what makes you think that having a cannabis store in Dunellen is going to prevent it from getting in the hands of youth members in Dunellen. Absolutely. You can, and the other thing about medical marijuana is that medical marijuana is still available for people who need it. It always has been, always will be, and they don't have to have a dispensary here in Dunellen.
I have a whole bunch of questions and a couple of comments. So a medical dispensary is vastly different from a retailer. I've been to a dispensary where they are secure, but my cousin was just with me while I was getting my hair done at a salon, and her 16-year-old daughter went right next door to the salon in New Jersey, a few towns over, and walked right into a dispensary, no ID or anything. So my concern is that we're like minimizing that all retailers are going to be, secure. Like I know in some towns, gas stations and like Quick Checks or Krausers, things like that, are selling cannabis products too. Our kids have access to that. And that's my issue. Like, we already have a problem in our town with the electronic vaping and cigarettes. Our kids are doing it in the school, outside of school, in front of the school. There's establishments in this town that are supposed to be regulated by these ordinances already that have not complied with them, are still selling to underage children. So again, we don't have a handle on nicotine products. Why are we going to bring cannabis products to this town and make it easier for our kids to have access to them? Again, if our town had a handle on it, I wouldn't really have a problem with it, but the fact is our town does not have a handle on it, because I can name a couple of examples of the ordinances not being followed. And the ordinances are wonderful. I think they're great, and they have great intentions. I'm on the Municipal Alliance as well because of this has impacted my own family and my own children. I do not agree with, putting any kind of a cannabis establishment here. Yes, a dispensary is not a big deal because they are secure, but retail is not secure. I've been to many different places where kids can walk in and buy the cannabis vapes or the cannabis edibles. They don't even get ID'd. So that's my concern for this town.
Great, all great concerns. So there's a few in the state, these retail CBD vapes who are not licensed, it's not regulated, who are open. And folks do go in, and whether it be Delta 8, Delta 9, which aren't CBD, which aren't cannabis products. So in terms of medical and retail, all are regulated and licensed holders in the state of New Jersey. So they all started out on medical. We had 12 operators who started out in the medical program. They were, in order to transition or switch to adult use or include adult use in their dispensary, they had to go through all these checks and balances with the CRC before they were able to get approval. So all the medical dispensaries that have gone adult use must accommodate patients as well in their medical facility. So I'm not sure, this is definitely an illegal an illegal retail store or maybe CBD.
This is illegal. It was illegal, and I've seen multiple legal retail stores that sell vapes and THC, marijuana, cannabis products.
Yeah, no, you raise a really good point. So first of all, the cannabis retailers that are licensed by the state, which are also medical shops, are highly secure. If your friend and her daughter walked into it, would be shocking. I mean, I frankly have a tough time believing it. What I don't have a tough time believing is the following, which you did mention. You can right now go to a gas station and get cannabis. You can get THC at levels that are higher than what you could buy at one of these stores. All right, there's CBD and there's CBD-derived cannabis products, which include the manipulation of CBD, cannabidiol, into tetrahydrocannabinol 8 and 10 and a number of other things. Those products come from hemp. Hemp is legal. The federal government and the FDA have not taken any steps. Those are legal, completely legal. They're not regulated by the state at all. They're not good. They're bad, and the FDA should be taking some action on them, but they're not. It's not something that easily can be dealt with by ordinance because it is federally fully legal. And some of these products that are coming yet, and why I hope the federal government takes some action, is that there are molecules that are in development that are based out of hemp-derived CBD that will be 10 times as strong as THC, will be completely federally legal, and can't be really messed with at all by anyone in this room, except with respect to certain time, place, manners. You could buy them at a gas station. You could buy 130 milligram Delta 8 gummy at gas stations in New Jersey right now. But that's not a dispensary. This is CBD, where the molecule has been adjusted to derive THC, but not Delta 9, which is the THC in dispensaries and that naturally occurs, but Delta 8, which is a proximate molecule, and Delta 10, which is a proximate molecule. So that's why when you do go into stores and you see we have Delta 8, that isn't regulated cannabis. It's manipulated. It's basically derived from either the manipulation of CBD or residual cannabis that's found in hemp.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but that product, because there's no FDA regulation, is legal for anyone to purchase, regardless of age.
Yeah, I guess.
Obviously, that's a problem, but it's not relevant.
And they're buying it here in this
No,
town.
it's a big problem, and that's where we're all yeah. But that's definitely not what we're talking about when we're talking about a regulated cannabis establishment, which is utilizing naturally occurring tetrahydrocannabinol or THC, right?
I think what the point that this young lady is making is a valid one, is that we have ordinances on the book that are not being enforced. That's the issue in the town with regular stores dispensing to underage individuals for cigarettes and sometimes for alcohol, vapes. And again, every municipality has this issue, and we don't have enough law enforcement or public safety officers to be able to do that, and we don't want to start criminalizing everything. So the point that you were bringing up about this is a phenomenon that's happening, we're now going to layer it with this new phenomenon, which will be regulated, which will be secure, which will have the stakeholders involved in the decision-making process. So how do we address the current ills in our society and then move forward with this, which can have positive residual impacts with revenue and providing a service to those who are of adult age and can make those decisions for themselves. So yes, that is the part, and I guess that would be our leadership within, mayor and council about enforcement in partnership with our law enforcement and public safety and things like that. So that's what I'm garnering from what you're saying. I'm hoping I did that justice. Okay.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. The Delta 8, Delta 9, I'm not a fan of. I never was. Yeah, but it's not regulated. No, I'm talking about the Delta 8. Yeah, the Delta 8. Delta 8, because it's actually not doing justice to the legitimate operators and the cannabis industry in itself. It crosses that line where, like you said, people are just walking into retail stores and purchasing.
Okay.
No education, no, so yeah, I am with you on that.
Well, I was just watching yesterday. I was on the news that a new study came out again about the dangers of inhaling, vaping, and the impact it's having on our youth. And it's a very serious problem. And again, my concern is that cannabis can obviously be consumed through vapes that the kids already have access to. I'm just not comfortable giving them more access, at least here. For me, as a parent in this town, I want to make it a little harder for them to get access to, yeah, I get the revenues and everything like that, but I just don't think, I don't think it's a good move for our kids.
I'd like to address the issue of finances. You keep talking about $20,000 on $1 million in sales. You expect to make a hell of a lot of money. On $5 million of sales, it would be $100,000. Not a significant number when you consider all things, all costs and everything. You also have to hire a tax person, part-time. You also have to hire an enforcer, part-time. So the $20,000 isn't anything. When you talk about making a big deal about making revenue, it doesn't appear to be a lot of revenue.
Yeah, so if they're making $1 million a month, that's $20,000 a month.
If you do $1 million in sales. But there's no, plus it's a diminutive return in the sense that the more stores that are open, the more people will go to other stores.
I'm sorry, I wanted to address a question to our representative from law enforcement. Are you detective, sergeant, detective?
Detective, correct.
Okay. We had mentioned, if, you were patrolling and saw someone walking down the street smoking a joint, because it's legal, you wouldn't be able to do any, there's no criminal activity going on. But does the same hold true if somebody's walking down the street drinking a bottle of beer?
No, that would be a borough ordinance open container.
So there's no reason why a borough ordinance couldn't be created to prevent people from doing that sort of thing in public. In the same way, there's an ordinance with respect to drinking in public on a sidewalk or something like that.
Right, and the mayor just touched. So the parks do have a no smoking ordinance, obviously. So if you're walking around smoking in a park, it doesn't matter what you're smoking. That would be a violation of the ordinance.
Right. Now, I don't have a great deal of experience with this, but I am a forensic scientist. And the comment that I had to do with impaired driving. And, currently, really, in order to deal with impaired driving, it is really discretion of the officer with respect to the impairment and the observable action of the person who's suspected of being impaired with respect to cannabis consumption. Obviously, alcohol, there's an actual chemical test that can be performed. There's even blood tests that can be performed. But because of the life of cannabis within your system, you can't really do that and be a fair judgment as to whether or not that's the cause of the impairment. But I can promise you one thing, that science, and in particular forensic science, is amazing. I promise you, within the next few years, as legalization of cannabis becomes more and more common throughout the United States, that there will be developed a means by which a traffic officer can stop somebody and test them chemically more accurately than just mere observation with respect to impairment with cannabis. I guarantee it'll happen. Beg pardon? Well, yeah, that's true, but I mean, right. Well, the idea isn't criminalization. The idea is preventing someone from operating a motor vehicle while they are impaired, regardless of the reason for the impairment. And certainly recreational use of marijuana is going to equally affect somebody's ability to drive in a similar fashion that alcohol would. Unfortunately, there's a means to test quantifiably alcohol consumption. There is no existing test for cannabis. What I'm saying is that'll happen. It will happen. It may take a few years, but it's going to happen. And in the meantime, I think that we can agree that most law enforcement officers are perfectly aware of the difference between somebody who's impaired and has an inability to drive, regardless of what the reason is, based on observation and their own discretion, going beyond the ability to quantify that impairment.
conduct both tests as an elimination or to try to figure out if it is alcohol versus cannabis? I guess
Yeah,
that would be
if I
for
could
law
add-
enforcement, yeah.
I did answer that before, but I'll do it again. The way the policies and procedures are handed down to us, the test is always at headquarters. I'm not talking about the roadside impairment judge test, the standardized field sobriety test. If the arrest decision is made, they're brought to headquarters. They're tested for alcohol. If they're over an 08, it ends there. It could be a combination of multiple things. If alcohol hits, that's it.
So now, what if it doesn't hit for alcohol?
Then we would move forward and see if the level of impairment that we observed matched the reading of the result. Or you're talking an 07, and maybe there were some other factors that led to the bad test, which that would be very, very rare, but that's a possibility. Or is this person gooned out of their mind and there's absolutely no alcohol in the system? There's probably something else at play. We would move forward to getting a drug recognition expert.
So currently, under your standard operating procedures, there is already a process of elimination that you go through.
Listen, I've been here for 10 years. There have been high drivers the entire time. This is not a new thing.
Okay. Well, that answers it.
So we have time for just a couple more questions, if anybody has them.
Yes, your timeline. The data has been shared now with the community. You've gotten an opportunity for public comment and feedback. What are your next steps in the strategic plan of making the decision to continue with opt-out status and or consider opting in?
Well, the task force is going to be tasked now with knowing the 2-to-1 vote, also with this survey, this public input, and then look into ordinances with other towns that are currently doing it, with consultation hopefully from Jacqueline and Hugh, and then make their recommendation. We were hoping to be making recommendations by the end of this year to council, but it just seems with time frame will most likely be going into the new year. And so hopefully early next year, these recommendations are coming to mayor and council. The council will then have the consideration on drafting an ordinance based upon these recommendations, which would then be voted on or not voted on depending on the outcome of the council and recommendations, and moving to planning board if the council goes that way. So we're looking into probably mid-year next year. We were hoping this year, but we're taking our time because regulations were, as we noted earlier, there's now new regulations coming out or additional regulations. It's best that we take our time. And I said this at the last town hall because it's now our second town hall on cannabis. As your mayor, I think you have a right to know where I voted on the state level. I voted in favor of it. So that's where I stand on the position. Mr. Androwski, I voted for the same exact reason as you did, criminal justice. So that's where my position is, and hopefully the task force will come to a conclusion with fair recommendations, what they feel. Like I said, there are a broad array of residents of the town from both spectrums of for, against, in between, diversity, different backgrounds and qualifications, different elements of our community in terms of nonprofits, residents, municipal officials, et cetera, to make those recommendations. So I know the council will take those seriously into consideration. Did I answer your question?
After you did. Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
You're welcome.
Your exclusionary zones, no, your exclusionary zones for schools and such, do they take into daycare? And you're saying you run all the way up to Jefferson Avenue, taking into account Jefferson School?
That's a good point. We actually just got the drug-free zone map from Plainfield, so that is taking that into consideration. It overlaps, yeah. Yep. That's a fair point. Well, I would say based upon the daycares that I know that are in that zone, there's, I may be wrong on this, but there's 2 in the downtown, and they fall into what is currently in that central circle, and any other churches or daycares on the outskirts of those. The churches, I don't believe, are considered within the drug-free zone. Correct. Yes. The Lutheran Church, which I do believe has an aftercare, is outside of what the zone is, but it's also residential, so we wouldn't even be considering that for zoning there.
I think it's interesting that according to the map, we saw that most of the town looks to be within a drug-free school zone. You know?
It's a good portion, yes.
And speaking of protecting the children, it's just too bad that there wasn't someone present tonight that could address this from a medical standpoint. While we might debate the benefits of some income from this venture, what money we would lose from not having dispensaries and shops, that's minor compared to what we're losing in human value when we talk about the effects on the children of this stuff. As a parent of 6 children, my interests were on their mental development, their physical development. We've done a lot of research as parents, and everywhere we looked, the evidence was overflowing and overwhelming about the devastating effects that this has on developing brains. And well into the 20s, not just when you turn 21, you know, have at it. We tell them up to their 21, this is bad and stay away from it. But when you're 21, just have a good time because it's legal. What hypocrisy. Think of the children and the loss that they're incurring.
Thank you for your input, Mr. Wright.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but we're still dealing with the same circumstance where we can opt out for as long as we wish, but if we opt in for a full 5 years minimum, correct?
Is that my understanding? It's for 5 years straight? Okay.
Okay, so once again, I want to congratulate you, in particular, the mayor, but the task force as well. Whatever happens here, we want to make sure we're taking baby steps, because if we allow it, it's a commitment, a time commitment.
Absolutely.
That we can't opt out of. And I understand that. There's a certain amount of investment that goes on, and you can't, you know, one day allow a business and the next day close them down. So taking these steps, looking at what's happening in other towns, and moving slowly is the right way to go. That's what we should be doing. So that's terrific. I'm wondering about the effects on children, though, in answer to the gentleman to my left, with respect to alcohol. And why is it that we don't have strong regulation with respect to alcohol? We don't. And given that, you know, and this is my opinion, but it's shared by, you know, I think the science, there is less detrimental effect with respect to the use of cannabis than there is with the use of alcohol. And yet alcohol is far more available to young people than cannabis will or ever could be.
It brings out things like schizophrenia. A lot of that comes to the fore. There's a serious question as to whether that's...
Alcohol will always be worse.
What the real threat is man's insatiable craving for sedation. I think the questions we should be answering are bigger.
And that is a question that will haunt the ages.
This doesn't just rest with philosophers and theologians. This is at the dinner table in every home, I think.
Right.
One thing on the 5-year. So if you opt in, you're opted in for 5 years under the regime that you set forth in your ordinance. At the end of the 5 years, you can't shut down any business that you've opened. They're grandfathered in permanently. Right. So it's 5 years with respect to the regime.
Which makes taking your time even more important.
Sure, and you could wait. There'll be delivery services running through this town inside of a year that are delivering to homes in Dunellen. There's plenty of opportunity for someone that got something delivered to someone's home to hand it to a kid. I mean, there's delivery services right now, tons of them. They're all illegal, but there'll be legal ones that'll be here. No, but it just makes it is. I don't want to conflate not and an is. It is, and you'll be able to assess more of what's going on by seeing the actual byproducts of commerce, right? I'm not saying that may never be the case that a community like this would want a dispensary, right? There are communities in the state that don't have alcohol, And maybe this is that community. I don't know. I'm not from this community. It's, the decision's pretty yours. But you're right. By baby steps, you'll see more and more of businesses that are opening on the borders of your town in Plainfield, right? And that will be selling into this town, and you'll see it. And it'll just be, there's a great wisdom in not going first, right? Others will make the mistakes, and you'll be able to see whether it makes sense.
That actually just gets to my next question I was going to ask them, if you don't mind. Mr. Wright, you bring up a good point. So your perspective now makes me think, and hopefully the task force think before they make any recommendations, to bring in somebody from the, as you said, a mental health, and speak to them, to take that into consideration. That is a fair point. So it's a perspective we should take into consideration as we make recommendations. But that, my question was going to be, in terms of the towns that are immediately around us, I know there's several that actually, most along the Raritan Valley line, opted out. Are they taking any similar approach, or do you know if Dunellen's one of the few that is doing this in this area? I know there's other towns doing this task force approach, but immediately in our area, are you aware of anybody? Okay, so but either way, but to Mr. Androwski's point, is there's no immediate right now any dispensaries or commercialization of recreational cannabis directly surrounding Dunellen? Woodbridge, I know, is one.
What do you mean, like as in currently operated, or that intends to operate?
Either or, in my perspective.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. I think Plainfield has cultivation going in, and I think it'll also have retail going in. And forgive me, I'm not quite sure about what the communities that are otherwise border your community here.
Sorry.
No. I'm
Not that as I say this, it means this is the direction we're going. I'm just using this as an example. There's 6 different categories, and one of them is solely retail. So Dunellen can choose any one of those other categories that is not retail and still benefit greatly from the revenue. So that's something that the task force could take into consideration. So it's just a perspective, something to consider. We had more questions, and we're running up on 8:30. Just want to give that point.
Can I just make a quick point about what he just said? Alcohol is regulated. It is illegal for children and underage people to consume alcohol. Sorry. I'm going to repeat that on the mic now so everybody at home can hear me. But alcohol is regulated. It is illegal for underage consumption, and yet kids have access to it. So it's just a matter of time before, when we start bringing these businesses, before they have access to cannabis too. I mean, the same thing with the vapes. It's illegal. It's regulated. Kids are not supposed to do it under 21, but they have access to it. So.
Don't fool yourself, regulation or no. Kids will use it.
Let's not make it easier for them to do it.
I think we have 3 memorials on Columbia Park to prove that.
Yes, and unfortunately, not everything is foolproof. You put these laws into place to hopefully prevent as much as you can. I think back to your point earlier to Terry was, they can't fully prevent it, but they're there to at least help lower the numbers, or at least the effort to prevent it. But behind us is the related businesses. So you have Class 1, which is a cultivator grower. Basically an entity that can grow or cultivate or produce cannabis. Cannabis manufacturer, basically the manufacturing of cannabis. Wholesaler, person or entity that purchases or otherwise obtains, stores or sells or otherwise transfers and may transport cannabis items for the purpose of resale for other entities like a retailer. Cannabis distributor, transports in bulk cannabis. I'm just paraphrasing and summarizing. Retailer, selling it on site. And then delivery, which is basically like a courier. They can personal delivery, bring it to your house, which is basically what can be, as Hugh said, is technically going on right now as we speak. So these are the 6 categories.
Can you remove a vendor for problems, even if they've been grandfathered
So the question. So the question from the gentleman is, can we shut them down if they're improper or not following the current regulations?
Yeah, I mean, you can probably answer that with the CRC.
Yeah, I mean, the state would yank the license. The state would yank the license.
What is the process?
It depends on the infraction. Right. They're violated. If they miss, the level of violations go from extremely mundane things with respect to packaging or failing to quarantine a product in the right area, to obviously diversion is one way you'll not only lose your license, but you go to jail, right? So it depends on what you're talking about if this happens. The level of regulation that these businesses go through is significantly, materially, actually monumentally more than a liquor store would go through or a purveyor of tobacco, right? So, yeah, they would lose their life. If they're diverting cannabis, you're in trouble, bad trouble, much more than alcohol.
Maybe explain every part is seed to sale and track.
Oh, yeah, so if you buy legal cannabis, right, that package, the CRC would be able to determine where those plants were grown and by whom, and where it was handled all the way through the chain of custody. From the seed to the sale, that cannabis is known to the state. It's also tested for quality with respect to pesticides, herbicides, heavy metals, microbials, right? So it all has to pass very rigorous testing standards. It has to be packaged and it's known throughout the entire process. So, I mean, the lengths are pretty extraordinary. Many communities, the cameras in the dispensaries have real-time feed capability to the police department. You can watch what's going on in your cultivation facility or in your store. And the CRC can do that as well. So we have pretty rigorous tracking that you're going to know what seed, well, we say clone, this plant, this product even if it's a vape cartridge, you would be able to trace where that plant, where the ingredients to that cartridge came from.
We have.
I work for a facility. The state of New Jersey knows every time I drop something on the floor. They know when I sneeze. They know when I go to the bathroom.
Would you mind just holding on so we can get, the public can hear you that's joining virtually? I think that's an interesting perspective.
I work
Insider
in a
perspective, right.
cultivation
Thank you,
facility.
Commander.
There are hundreds of cameras where I work. The state of New Jersey knows every time I drop something on the floor. They know when I sneeze. They know when I take my lunch, when I go to the bathroom. My hiring process was 2 months long. Background checks, fingerprints. I have a badge that I need to swipe every single door into that building. The state knows every time I enter my department, every time I leave my department. When I go to another department, they watch you 24/7. It is like Fort Knox.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have time for one last question before we close this up. Mr. Androwski, if we could wait for the microphone, please, just so people in the virtual world have an opportunity.
I'm so far over right now.
Just one comment, and that is, if everybody in this room would take the time to read or watch a movie, it's called It's a Wonderful Life with Jimmy Stewart. It shows the difference between making good decisions and bad decisions.
Well, thank you. So I'm going to take that as the last question. I just want to thank everybody for being here this evening. Let's give a round of applause for the panelists and Dr. Gendrano for his presentation on the survey results.
Mr. Mayor, if I may just say too, I'd
Yes.
also like to thank the folks that came out tonight to actually have a really good discussion. This is, I think we hit a home run here in being able to, I was really concerned that we would sit here, we would give our presentation, and it would be crickets. And I'm glad that we actually had a conversation about this. I see this as the start of, as they say in Casablanca, the start of something beautiful.
Absolutely.
Did I screw that
as
up?
you noted earlier, it's all about moving forward together on this.
That's
taking
right.
Both sides, and whatever we come down to as a conclusion, people feel we took a step-by-step approach, and they're comfortable with the decision that ultimately comes out of this. So we'll continue to move forward together. I want to thank everybody again for being here. This was a great dialogue, different perspectives. It was an honest and respectful, and let me say, civil conversation, which is very important around these topics. So thank you for being here and having that conversation. I do want to just say, Councilmember Albertson and I were just kind of brainstorming a little bit quickly. Maybe it's worth, once the task force starts thinking about recommendations, we have another town hall, and maybe a medical individual comes in at that time, and we have another, before we formally get to the council, to have this conversation. And we'll have enough time to, you know, before council and planning board, et cetera, get to make a decision, get more public reaction.
Mr. Mayor, just to preempt the question, will these slides be available afterwards?
They will be available on the website, PDF, and so will a link to our YouTube channel. Yes.
Okay. The question will come, so.
Last point, as part of my administration, I hold town halls throughout the year. The next town hall, the last one for this year, will be December 8th at 7 p.m. It's another important topic for Dunellen. It will be on redevelopment, where we were, where we are at, and where we are going. It'll talk about affordable housing. It'll talk about tax incentives, and it'll talk about the various projects that we have. So it's important that you also attend that meeting and we get your input and have a conversation about that. Okay, so if we don't see you at that, have a good, happy Thanksgiving and holiday season, and happy Halloween too, because that's the next one coming up, right? Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you.